You're listening to the Sass Says podcast. I'm your host, Christy Rocha, also known as Sass. I identify as a woman, a wife, and a mother. That should tell you a lot already. And over the last few years, I've learned the value of talk therapy. I have seen how my inner work not only enhances my own well-being, but also my marriage, my parenting, my relationships. And in fact, you wouldn't be hearing this right now if it weren't for the work I've done. My mission is to debunk the misconceptions and stigmas around what therapy is and who it's for. Let's normalize working on our mental health and seeking help when needed. We've all heard of self-care, self-help, and self-love, but do you often wonder how to actually make it all happen? I do. You'll hear strategy-based conversations with professionals, as well as inspiring and validating stories from women who are just like you and me. Think of this podcast as the weekly therapy sessions you didn't know you needed, with a dash of sass, a lot of vulnerability, and me, relentlessly asking, but how? Okay, oh my gosh, my guest today is Libby freaking Ward. Yes, Libby Ward, also known by her social media handles as Diary of an Honest Mom. Libby is a digital creator, speaker, and mental health advocate with a deep commitment to breaking the cycles of trauma. Every week, Libby's content reaches millions of women around the world, and she has grown a dedicated community of over 1.2 million and growing on social media in just over 2 years. Did you hear that? Over 1.2 million in 2 years. Oh my goodness. She has been recognized as a mental health advocate by TikTok and has been featured on global news, Motherly, Insider, and media outlets around the world. As a thought leader in today's difficult and complex experience of mental health, Libby is focused on reaching more women with her perspective-changing stories through speaking engagements and brand partnerships that make a real impact. Okay, so let's just get this out of the way. Yes, Libby is as wonderful as you see her on social media. She is real, honest, vulnerable, smart, and so generous with her time, her story, and her passion for helping women and moms cope with the world around them. Libby and I discuss her ADHD diagnosis and what she does differently now that she has a diagnosis. We talk about her challenging and at times traumatic childhood, including emotional neglect and psychological abuse. We talk about how her experience becoming a mom now, ×2, has shaped her perspective on life and her past. We talk cycle breaking. We also talk about the pressure on influencers to be an authority on current events, the ups and downs of being a content creator, and of course, it pained me, but I had to ask her about the drama you may have heard about on TikTok. So I appreciate her answering my questions, even though I'm sure she didn't want to. This is such an amazing conversation. I know you're going to love it. Enjoy. Here's Libby. Hey, Libby. So nice to meet you. Thank you for being here with me.
Thanks so much. Thanks for having me.
It's so funny. I know that you are one of the most relatable women on the internet, but sitting down with you and seeing your face, it's like, oh my God, there she is. It's so funny. I don't know how that makes you feel, but I feel like I'm looking at a celebrity a little bit. So,
well, thank you very much. As the listeners would not know, when we started this a few minutes ago, when we were chatting before the interview, I was just a hot mess express situation with my phone falling down and my hair falling out. And like, I am as much of a hot mess in real life as I am on the internet. So it's the real deal over here.
I love it. All right. So Diary of an Honest Mom, your three kind of pillars: motherhood, mental health, cycle breaking. And I think there's a lot of overlap in all three of those, right? But where did it start for you? What comes to mind immediately when you hear those three things and the start of your platform?
The start of my platform was in March 2020, at the beginning of the pandemic, on TikTok. So prior to that, I worked in education, and I actually had heard of TikTok like a month before that. And I just thought it was like an app where teenagers danced, and it was like inappropriate and unsafe. And so I would tell the children, do not go on TikTok. It's bad. The internet is bad. And then the pandemic started and I downloaded the app and thought, I wonder what this is about, and fell in love with the authenticity I saw and the real relatable stories I heard, and the moms specifically that I saw on there talking about many of the things that I struggled with. And for the first time, social media helped me feel seen in my life and not judged or ashamed of who I was or how I mothered or how I grew up or any of those things. And that really started. I didn't intend to become a content creator, influencer, anything like that. I didn't know anything about that. I just have always had a creative brain and have always really treasured connecting with other women. And so I started making videos and they started going viral pretty quickly.
Mhm.
And so I started out talking mostly just about motherhood and mostly making more like comedic videos, just being funny. I love to be funny. Humor is my coping mechanism, one of them anyway. And that really connected with people. And from there on out, I just sort of grew in what I was comfortable sharing and how I was comfortable sharing it and finding my voice and seeing just how many women and moms were in very similar boats to me. And I've sort of ridden the wave since then. But TikTok was the beginning.
Yeah. I remember seeing early on, I think it was during the pandemic, and you can correct me, but you have a video on TikTok about it's you just like cleaning your kitchen and it's on high speed and you're doing a voiceover. And the part that I'll never forget, and when I heard it the first time, was about feeling like so badly that you wanted to be the fun mom again, but feeling so trapped in your environment and like feeling just so overwhelmed. And oh my goodness, like tears of mine were shed every time I watch it. I can't not, because either I'm in a moment of overwhelm and I'm watching it, or I can just put myself back to that
Mm-hmm.
really, really challenging time. I think I know all mothers went through, particularly during lockdown, that it was just like, how is this real life? This can't be what life is, because I don't want it like this.
Right. Right. And the monotony and the
Yeah, the monotony.
mundaneness and
Yeah.
the fact that you're always busy and you never stop moving and doing things for others. And yet you never actually feel like you've accomplished anything at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And I remember just getting to a point where I was like, is this just motherhood? Like, okay, maybe I'm depressed, but maybe this is just what it's supposed to feel like. And nobody ever said that. And it's not depression and it's just motherhood. And so I went through a long time of really trying to separate, like, is this mental health or is this just motherhood? Or is there some sort of intersection? And the realizations I've really made over the last, I'd say like 5 years in particular, has been that it's a complete intersection.
Mm.
And I think a lot of times people like to separate the issues we have into categories, like, well, this is a motherhood problem. This is a trauma problem. This is a mental health problem. This is an ADHD problem. When in fact, a lot of the struggles that we have, each of us individually could have the exact same problem, and it's more influenced by, let's say, our circumstances in motherhood, or more influenced by our mental health, or more influenced by our trauma. And so the reason I talk about trauma and mental health and motherhood together is that they're all so connected to one another, and pulling those pieces apart and becoming aware of ourselves and what is causing it all and then how we can do to fix it is really complicated and really hard and really shame-filled. It was for me for a really long time. And so I would just like to have other people not be quite so ashamed as I was.
Yeah. Well, and I think that we have this desire for things to just be cookie cutter and easy in that way. And so it does feel natural to sort of lane things, right? Like put things in categories, because then we can like tackle one at a time. But
Mm-hmm.
I also think that because that's not realistic, that is what makes it so hard to cope,
Mm-hmm.
because you go to a therapist for one thing, you go to social media for another thing, you go to your friends, your family for another thing, and we need just like this like fairy. I don't know who she is, but we need like the holistic fairy to just like combine everything. I don't know, maybe you're the fairy, but it's like just it's like, who do we go to?
It's so hard. Like I I have ADHD, so I see a psychiatrist and we're trying to figure out my medication dosage right now. And I also have a therapist who I talk to about lots of things you talk to therapists about, like my
Right.
childhood, all that kind of stuff. And it's really fascinating to me how my conversations with both of them are so different, and it can be about the exact same issue.
Mm-hmm.
And from the psychiatrist's point of view, and when I tell her about something that's happened or something I'm struggling with, well, that's very typical of someone with ADHD. You know, of course you would, because XYZ. And what she says makes complete sense. I'm like, oh, yeah, my brain's wired differently. Like, it's ADHD. I could go to my therapist with the exact same issue, and she sees it from the framework of an attachment issue that I developed in my childhood trauma. And well, of course, you're going to act and behave and react in those ways because you were conditioned for 18 years to do that. And then I look at my sociology degree, which says, well, society expects you to XYZ because you're a woman, because women are treated differently and it's unequal. And that's how you're socialized to behave. And so then I'm like, okay, so which one is it? And what solution do I use? Do I use breath work? Do I use Adderall? Do I use another degree? Like, I don't know. So like, and it's so heavy and so confusing. And that's just for one issue. And I have a lot of issues. So.
And you've been very open about some of your challenges in life. And I appreciate that so much. I know there are so many of us who do. What, and we can get into them a bit, but I think just addressing what you just said, how do you, Libby, start to cope then when we have all these different outlets and different professionals and opinions and they truly, at the end of the day, I don't think you do either. I don't mean to knock all of those resources, right? But it's like, how do you bring them together for yourself?
What I've had to do is become extremely aware of myself and extremely aware of the different answers that are out there. In our society these days, we've become so polarized on so many different subjects that it seems like you either have to be all natural, non-toxic, organic, crunchy, do it the natural way, or you need to be prescriptive medicine, go see the doctor about everything, research, science, traditional medicine, all that type of stuff. Mm-hmm. And the reality is that each of the different ways that we can, face the issues that we have in our lives, there's benefits to all of them. And each of us individually have to say, what works for me? What makes the most sense to me? And can I actually access that, tool to help myself cope? Because something that's going to help me cope, I might have access and the privilege of, what am I trying to say here? So let's say there's a tool that says, well, you need more support in your life. You need to lean on more support. Not everybody has the opportunity to reach out. They don't have family members close by. They don't have a partner who supports them. They don't have that. So yes, that is a tool that's going to help people who are struggling with their mental health. But if you don't have that, there are other things you can do based on your circumstance. So for me, what I had to do is I had to get a bird's eye view of my life and say, what are all the things that are impacting me, both negatively and positively? What are the things that I have access to cope? And what things do I want to reach out to? Mm-hmm. And I know that sounds like a very nuanced answer, but I think that's the whole thing, is that there isn't just one way to do it. And so for me, in my coping, I have just had to keep an open mind. Mm-hmm. That's one of the biggest things, is not say, well, I have ADHD, so now that means that I'm going to ignore all the books I've read about trauma, and I'm going to ignore everything my therapist said, and I'm going to ignore all the articles I've read, and I'm going to ignore everything on social media that doesn't fit the ADHD narrative. I'm going to say, I have ADHD, and these strategies that people who work with people who have ADHD work for me, but also there's strategies from all these other areas that also help me. Mm-hmm. So it really, for me, has become about being aware, keeping an open mind to all the different strategies, and then using the ones that work for me, and then stopping using the ones that don't work for me, because some haven't, and it's just trial and error. Yeah. I spent a long time thinking that like there was going to be one solution to my problems, or that, I get an ADHD diagnosis and it fixes everything, or I see a therapist and it fixes everything. But the reality is life is a journey, and the journey sucks a lot of the time. And we need to keep reinventing how we cope with it.
Were you a later in life diagnosed ADHD?
Yeah, just this year.
Just this year. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I'm seeing that and hearing of that a lot more often, or maybe it's just the nature of social media these days where people are sharing it more, but I feel like that's become more common. And it's like all of a sudden, and you speak to your own experience, but it's like all of a sudden your life makes sense in so many ways.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Like it never crossed my mind before, last year that I might have ADHD. And it really was through social media that I realized like, oh, this could be a thing. This could be why I am the way that I am.
Yeah.
And it was really freeing and validating, and made so much sense when I was diagnosed. And medication has absolutely helped me. But at the same time, I do see this thing on social media now where I see these ADHD accounts who are very much like, if you're like this and you're like this and you're like this and you're like this, and you probably have ADHD and go see your doctor. And the problem with short form video is it's like, hold up, like,
Right.
hold up, hold
Right.
the phone. Let's get some context. Let's get some context on this, because a lot of the symptoms of the ADHD do mirror that of trauma in a very strong way. And I think it's Dr. Gabor Maté who really like pulls apart that argument as well and looks at it from a different perspective. And so I have noticed that. I do genuinely believe I have ADHD, but I'm still weeding through what is ADHD, what is trauma, all that kind of stuff. And so that's where I say, keep an open mind.
Yeah.
It's so easy to jump on the social media train of, oh, well, it's this now. That's what everyone's saying.
Right.
And then close our minds off to alternative ways to cope with our life or to get help for the problems that we have.
Yeah. What were some of the, for you, what were some of the, I don't know, like warning signals or triggers or like, whoa, that sounds like me for you with the ADHD and or trauma, whichever one, when you see those things online and you're like, oh yeah, that sounds like me. What did it look like for you?
Right. So I have a really hard time getting focused on a task. I follow a lot of rabbit trails in what I do, and I have multiple things going on at the same time, and I will like not get any of them done efficiently. I get distracted very easily. So, we talk about social media. I'm on my phone completing one job because it's my job. And if I get a notification that I got an email prior to being on medication, I would have to read that email because it would, I'd be like, oh yeah, let's follow the rabbit trail. And then it would distract me from all the things. I get overstimulated really easily. I'm highly like just disorganized. Like I leave things around a lot, and that like induced a lot of shame. And that was one for me that I was like, well, my mom was really disorganized. My mom never taught us a lot of personal hygiene. Like it wasn't modeled to me to stay organized. I didn't have anyone teaching me that. And so it was this thing of like, well, is it just harder for me because I'm having to teach it to myself? Or is it ingrained in me? And ADHD is hereditary. So am I just reproducing the ADHD traits that she had, or nature versus nurture type thing? And so that was one of those things where I'm like, am I a disorganized hot mess because I was raised this way, or because I'm genetically made this? And so that was one of them. And I could go on about a lot of different symptoms I had, but one big one that they say people with ADHD have is this like hyper focus. So people have always said to me, you have this ability to just get more done than the average person in X amount of time. Like, where do you get that from? And so one of the traits of having ADHD is just like this hyper focus, where if it's something that you're stimulated by, that you're interested in, that you're passionate in, you just have this like incredibly high productivity rate. Then you can look at it from the trauma angle and say, well, I stay busy to not think about my problems. You look at attachment and they're like, well, you were raised in a household where you earned love by doing, and you earned your worth by doing more and pleasing everyone and staying busy and being productive. That's what you've done your whole life. That's what you're going to keep doing. And then you get to adulthood and struggle with your mental health. And conveniently, you think less about your mental health when you're busy doing all the things. So it's just one of those
a nice
things
little cycle.
you pull it apart and you're like, okay, yeah, it could be ADHD or it could be trauma.
Yeah.
But regardless of what the label is, there's things that are going to help you regardless, whether they come from a therapist or a psychiatrist, or, you know, the advice comes from someone on social media. There are things that, regardless of what the label is, that is going to help you cope.
Mm-hmm.
So I try and focus more on the coping mechanisms and the things I can do to help, as opposed to the label and what it falls under.
Mm-hmm. And as far as ADHD, medication is a coping mechanism for you. Like what else have you changed in your routine or in your life that you're doing differently pre-diagnosis?
Well, I'm giving myself a whole lot more grace and not beating myself up for being a bit of a disaster. Educating my family and my husband. So even like having the people closest to me, like understand that this is how I'm wired, has been so helpful, and giving them the tools to interact with me, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
So for example, when I'm working on a task and I've spent forever trying to focus on it, and then I'm finally focused on it, if my husband interrupts me, it derails me a lot. Whereas if he's on a task and I interrupt him, he can just get right back to it.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's been a thing of like, I've had to change even how I talk to my husband about like what things are going to work for me or not in our relationship and our family and our household, so that he knows the reasoning behind why things are so hard for me.
Mm-hmm.
I now have an Apple Watch that I wear that gives me reminders when things are going to happen. Like the number of times I've forgotten, that it's a spirit day at school for my kids, or that I have an appointment coming, or that I have a podcast interview in 10 minutes, or whatever it is. By wearing my Apple Watch, it literally like shakes on my wrist to be like, there's something happening. And it reminds me to do those things. Like, it's not just about having a calendar. Like, I need someone to be like, it's time to take your vitamins. So that has been really, really helpful. And then just making sure that I'm on top of the strategies that work for me. Like, I know that if I'm active in a day, it helps me be more focused. It helps me feel more sane. It helps me feel more grounded. And knowing those things and then taking the medication also helps me to execute on all my well-laid plans that I used to make and then just not execute on.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's really a combination, of scheduling things and following through on plans and that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. All right. So going to the trauma aspect, you've talked a lot on your platforms. I've heard you in interviews talking about, your childhood. 10 out of 10 would not recommend, from your words, not mine. Would you share a little bit about your childhood, your experience with your mom, your father? And I'm so sorry about his passing. I know that was not too long ago. Share for anyone listening who's just meeting you, kind of the snapshot, short version of your childhood trauma.
Right. I'll keep
just
it
easy peasy question, like totally light.
Humanly possible. So my dad is deaf. He became deaf as an infant. He was deaf, illiterate, had, intellectual disabilities. And he and my mother had my brother and I, and shortly after they separated. So I was mostly raised by a single mother. My dad was still in my life till I was about 10 years old. And then we moved away from that city, and we were no longer allowed to contact him. So I didn't have contact with him for the second half of my childhood. Regardless, there was lots of other men, just delightful creatures, note the sarcasm in my voice, who came in and out of our lives. And so I mostly had a childhood that was unstable and unpredictable and high conflict, stressful. And there was a lot of responsibility on my shoulders from a young age. And so I really took the role of being in charge and taking care of my mom and making sure that things were okay. We moved every year of my childhood or more. So we didn't really have consistent community around us. We lived in poverty. I've lived everywhere from the inner city to on a hobby farm to on my uncle's couch to a shelter and everywhere in between. And I grew up very quickly. My mom had undiagnosed bipolar disorder, And so that came with a lot of narcissistic traits and struggled with undiagnosed and untreated mental health problems. And so she really had her own trauma that caused a lot of that. But unfortunately, she did not have access to any of the resources that would help her get out of that. And, we got involved with some not so great individuals. So I suppose my trauma would be mostly that of an emotional neglect and psychological abuse nature, but it's highly complex and interconnected. But that's the long and short of it. Some narcissistic abuse and a lot of inconsistency and unpredictability.
Yeah. What you just did in saying that in this sort of like elevator pitch form, like, could you always have done that? Or how did you get to a place where you could I don't want to almost casually just talk about a lot of heavy personal, emotional things that happened in your life?
Right. I wouldn't say I could always do it. I would say that I've always been someone who's been fairly open, someone who's been fairly self-aware, and someone who is highly fascinated by psychology and sociology and the value of good communication skills.
Mm-hmm.
So when I became an adult, I very quickly was like, oh my gosh, that was crazy. How do I stop that from happening again and to my future children? And so I very quickly started reading books and reading articles and surrounding myself with people that I wanted to be like and not like people I was raised around. And so I started the work, I would say, pretty quickly in getting the vocabulary to talk about it. And over time, I've learned that sharing my story, while it may be shocking to some people, it's also extremely empowering for others to know that they're not alone and that they're able to be vulnerable as well. And so, I read all of Brene Brown's books on vulnerability, and all of it has really helped me to see the power in being vulnerable. But also because it's my story, it's not I often will tell my story in a joking manner. Like my brother and I will get together and we'll just laugh our butts off. And the people in the room with us are crying because they're like, oh my gosh, like, I can't believe you told that story. That's awful. Like, that's terrible. But when it's your reality, it's not as shocking to you as it is for other people. It's kind of just, well, that's what my life was. Mm-hmm. And I'm just going to say it how I was. Now, if I was in a therapy session and my therapist said, well, when this event happened, how did that make you feel? Well, then maybe I might get emotional. But right now it's kind of just like, that is what happened.
Fact.
It's just facts. Like, it's just the facts of what happened. And I'm able to tell the story with a lot more grace and empathy for my mom now because I see where a lot of her behaviors and things she did came from. 10 years ago, I would have told you a story of how my mother was horrible and I lived in poverty and that was the worst part. And now I understand that it's so much more nuanced than that. And the poverty wasn't the worst part. It was the emotional neglect. Mm-hmm. So it's just facts, basically.
Yeah. And in becoming a mother yourself, was it an immediate like, oh, I have more understanding and empathy for my own mother? Or how did the intersection of your own motherhood journey and your relationship and with your mom coincide?
Right. So I would say before I became a mom, mentally, I'd forgiven my mom and I've moved on. I had moved on. We had a relationship. Reflecting back, it was codependent. We had a relationship where I was still very much responsible for her. And I would sort of make jokes about how, she wasn't all there and things like that, but that I had forgiven the past. And I honestly didn't think about it too much. And then I became a mom and I actually went through a real stage of grief because I no longer just looked at my mom as someone who did these things and didn't do certain things that hurt me, but I looked at her through the eyes of being a mother myself because I saw my own children, my first baby, and the love, the immediate, intrinsic, natural, exponential love that I had for my baby. Mm-hmm. I didn't see that from my mom towards me. Mm-hmm. And I think my heart was broken all over again when I became a mom because I thought, like, I have goosebumps saying this. I thought, like, how could you do that?
Yeah.
How could you say those things? How could you do those things? How could you move us that many times? How could you expose us to XYZ? If you loved us, me,
Mm-hmm.
me and my brother, even a fraction of the amount that I love my children, how could you, how?
Mm-hmm.
Just how? And so that was really, really hard for me. And it unlocked like a whole extra level of like bitterness and resentment and grief towards her. And it really is what initiated me going to therapy
Mm.
and really trying to figure out like what happened, what is continuing to happen, why is this so hard, and why do I have all these feelings?
Mm-hmm.
And so I've had a lot of growth since then, but that first year was very much like just how.
Yeah. Have you, through therapy or an outside of therapy, whatever works, have you been able to answer that how for yourself?
I would say 80 to 90%, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I
Yeah.
I look at this, if I look at it from a sociological perspective and a historical perspective, and just the sheer lack of knowledge around mental health,
Mm-hmm.
research about personality disorders,
Mm-hmm.
access to healthcare, mental health care, um, all of that stuff, in the past, and even the stigma as well. It really has not been that many years
Yeah.
since women stopped being locked up because they had depression.
Right. I know. It's insane.
It hasn't been that long. It's
I
less
know.
than a century,
I know.
less than a century. And so you
Insane.
talk about stigma, and I hear people say like, how could they? I was one of those people, and I'm not knocking on those people. But when you really look at it, you're like, okay, the books weren't around.
Right.
The articles weren't around, the research wasn't there, the access for women to even get the research wasn't there. They weren't going to university, they weren't reading it, the social media wasn't there. Where were they learning about it?
Mm-hmm.
And so then you can say, well, you don't need to learn about just how to love your children. Well, no, but I'm reading The Body Keeps the Score right now, but like we are physiologically changed when we experience trauma. And when our parents experience trauma, and they're conditioned their whole lives to act and react in certain ways, and then nobody has the language to talk about cycle breaking or mental health or anything like that, it's kind of like, well, what do you expect?
Mm-hmm.
And so it doesn't mean it doesn't hurt less, and it doesn't mean it's like an excuse or like it's fine that they did it, but it just brings this level of understanding of, I can see how that happened.
Yeah.
I can see how you did that. I can see how, as a mother who had her own attachment issues and lacked self-esteem and lacked security and lacked all these things, how someone like that could latch on to whatever man would give them attention, even if that came with a lot of struggle and trauma for her own children.
Mm-hmm.
And it's helped me to have empathy and grace for, my mom and then all the generations before her. And so I would say like one of the hardest things, and one thing I'm getting better at, is holding space for allowing myself to feel hurt and feel negative feelings and understand the depth of the impact that my mom had on me, while also understanding where that came from. And it isn't just about her being bad or not loving me or being mean. It's so much deeper than that. And that's where that generational trauma piece comes in.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know if you know of her, but Dr. Becky Kennedy she's Dr. Becky Good Inside. She always talks about how two things can be true.
Absolutely.
And
Yeah.
it relates a lot to just the kind of the thread of this conversation is like, there's not a lane that we're just going
No.
to put things into. They're all going to intersect. What advice do you have for a mom, a woman out there that's listening and relating to your childhood, relating to trauma that they might have gone through that was similar to yours, and now they're a mom? What advice would you give her?
As a mom, my
Yeah.
advice would be to give yourself grace for the ways that you don't show up perfectly or even close to the ways that you want to show up for your children.
Mm-hmm.
Because the things that you struggle to do, the things you get triggered by, the things that don't come easily to you have a source and a reason, and it's not an intrinsic character flaw of
Mm-hmm.
yours.
Mm-hmm.
So give yourself grace, but also don't let it be an excuse
Mm.
to continue the cycle. Breaking the cycle is unbelievably hard, but it is of the utmost importance. And it's a journey. It's not a destination. It's something that you'll just continually have to work on.
Mhm.
So if you're a mom and you're raising your children and you're realizing that you're continuing cycles and you want to change it, it's not a matter of just mentally saying, I'm going to stop doing this and the next day not doing it anymore. That's like, it's literally impossible. Start with a podcast, start with an article, start with a book, start with a blog post, start with following someone on social media who gets it. You don't have to do it all right now. You don't have to fix everything right now, but recognize that it's not your trauma, and the things that you may have gone through aren't your fault, but not continuing them for your kids is unfortunately your responsibility.
Yeah. Yeah. As far as cycle breaking in your own life, where did you start? Like almost on a day to day, like what's a tangible example of something that you decided to do differently?
Right. So to be clear, the word cycle breaker didn't come into my vocabulary until about 18 months ago.
Okay.
I had never even heard of it before. All I knew was that I didn't want the childhood for my kids that I had.
Mm.
It started with me knowing that I didn't want our household environment to be volatile and to be angry and to be unpredictable. And me knowing that I didn't want my kids to feel responsible for my emotions and what happened in our life. In a very practical way, I asked my husband to keep me accountable. He's very much a calm person and a very level-headed person, and yelling wasn't a part of his environment growing up, so that is something I have in my favor. Not everyone will have that, but being open with him about it is a struggle. I naturally want to yell. Just because I'm not yelling, it doesn't mean I don't want to yell. I am deeply filled with rage over this small inconvenience or this loud noise or this thing that you may look at it logically and say that's not something to be angry about, but I am filled with deep rage. So number one, encourage me and validate me. And number two, try and help me keep in check.
Yeah.
Keep letting him know and letting others know my intentions, so that when my actions don't align with my values, I can get those gentle reminders of hey, what about this? So I mean, my first step was really making sure our environment was a safe place for my kids. That's my number one for me, is I want home for my kids to feel like the place where they are the safest.
And I'm glad you brought that up about sharing with your partner or your support system, because I think that is an aspect of I guess motherhood really that we just don't talk about enough. I think that there is so much left just wide open for us to just figure out. So much changes about your dynamic with your partner when little humans that are completely dependent on you enter the scene.
Yeah.
And I think speaking, very generally and just oversimplifying it, but our heterosexual male partners, they want to just fix things and solve them. And everything you're saying, it's if you, instead of seeing a chaotic moment and trying to fix it, the amount of times I just wanted him to look at me and go, this is insane. That actually is more supportive than sometimes being hey, what can I do? What should I do? It's I don't want to tell you what to do. I just want you to acknowledge the chaos that is right now. And so that I don't feel like a Looney Tune out here on this island by myself. And you're just thinking everything's fine, or you're not thinking anything, or whatever it is. And it's such a major shift that I don't think we talk about enough.
It's that validation piece. Because I know for me, when I am in that moment of triggered fight or flight, this is so loud, I'm going to lose my mind, I genuinely feel insane.
Yeah.
In my head, I'm you're insane.
Yeah.
You're turning into her. This is exactly what you didn't want to do. You're crazy. And someone could come along and try and fix the situation and, oh, guys, be quiet, and oh, whatever. And so maybe, that gets fixed. But what that ends up making me feel is that I am making everyone else have to fix the environment to deal with mom who's crazy,
Right.
as opposed to someone looking at me and saying, you're not crazy.
Mm-hmm.
This is literally insane. It's normal that you feel like punching something.
Yeah.
Like,
Yes.
you're not a crazy person for wanting to punch something. That is a natural reaction to what's happening right now.
Yeah.
Because I realized, one of my deepest fears is like that I'm crazy.
Mm.
And I know that like that wording and that vocabulary, and like don't cut this up and use that in a something. But like in my mind, that's where my mind goes quickly. Like when I'm internally losing it, I'm like, oh, you're a crazy person. And I don't believe there are crazy people, but
I
that's
know
how I
what you
speak
mean.
to myself.
Yes.
That's how I
know what you
speak to
mean.
myself. And I don't want, and I don't want to feel that way. You want the people who know you and love you, like your partner, to see you for who you are and to validate that a problem is a problem and that you're not just making it up in your head or that you're not capable of dealing with it.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
that's enough of it. A lot of women feel like, well, I'm not capable because there's something wrong with me. It's like, no, this is hard because it's hard.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes. I don't know. I don't know if it's, because I've now put myself into this world of talking about this sort of thing all the time, but it's like mind-boggling to me that only 4 years ago when my oldest was born, that like this was all brand new information. To me, I mean, like, and now it feels more commonplace to be talking about like the real of motherhood, the honesty in motherhood, and the vulnerability and the fact that it's just hard. But I feel like, now that I'm saying it out loud and I'm processing, I actually think that when I had my daughter, my 4-year-old, that was still very much during the time of highly curated content. Highly like matching outfits. The feed had to look a certain way. Like there was almost no behind the scenes. It was very like picture perfect. And that matched what in my head I had glamorized and romanticized motherhood and wifehood and home ownership and adulting would be. And so then when the reality doesn't match what you thought it would be and what you're seeing out there in culture, yeah, of course I'm wondering what's wrong with me.
Yeah, absolutely. And it just instills the shame cycle. It just perpetuates it. When you already are feeling self-conscious about what your house looks like or your family looks like or how you're reacting to your kids or all these different things, you're already self-conscious about it. And when you don't see your reality reflected anywhere you look, it just makes you feel even worse about it.
Yeah.
And it's so hard. My daughter turns 8 tomorrow, my oldest. So it's wild to think that I became a mom 8 years ago, but it was absolutely everything curated, perfect houses, perfect kids, all of that stuff. And I just thought, I am a disaster. Like this, I just felt so ashamed of myself. And that doesn't help anyone, doesn't help my kids, doesn't help me, and I was actually a good mom. I was doing great, but I didn't know that because I was comparing myself to what I saw online. And it's very easy to say, oh, don't compare, like comparison's the thief of joy. Yeah, I know, but there's no one else around me that looks like me. So it's hard.
Yeah. Do you feel like now, as being a person who is on a platform with a large following, creating content, do you feel pressure to now be this identity that you're kind of known for? I mean, I have to imagine that there are parts of you that are kept sacred and are kept intimate. And like, so so I guess that is my question. Do you feel now that you have a quote unquote like persona and identity that you feel pressure to maintain?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because even though I am very much real and I'm very much myself and I'm very much honest about my struggles, I actually have a bit of, I would say, maybe an opposite problem to more traditional influencers and content creators, in that maybe they struggle to be vulnerable. Maybe they struggle to talk about the real things or post the imperfection. I struggle to share the positive things in my life. I share what I'm good at. I share to struggle just the good stuff, like I'm a white, middle-class, blonde mom.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm, like,
Yeah. Yeah.
we're not struggling financially.
Right.
I live in the most beautiful house I've ever lived in. I mean, it's not like a lot of, other influencers or whatever, but it's a heck of a lot nicer than anything I ever grew up in or many of my followers have.
Right.
I do have a beautiful home. I do have a supportive husband. I do have children without intellectual or physical disabilities. I have a lot of privilege. And if you were to meet me on the street on one of the days that I dress nice, I would look like any one of the other influencers out there.
Right.
And that almost brings me shame.
Yeah.
I struggle to post a photo or a video or something where I feel good about myself because of course, sometimes I am put together and
Right.
I do love doing my hair and I do like wearing nice clothes.
Right.
And it is nice when my kids match for one, so they're not making ridiculous faces and have Big Mac sauce on their face. Like, of course, I'm put together sometimes.
Right.
I actually struggle to share some of that. We travel. My husband's from England. We go to England every summer. And we haven't for 3 years. We're hopefully going next week. But there's things that I do and I have in my life that I almost don't know how to talk about because I'm so well known for being relatable and being imperfect and being a hot mess and talking about the hard things that, the moment I share something else, I'm worried. And sometimes it's true. Like people will say things about like, oh, well, how can you say that when your house looks like that? Or how can you, whatever. And it's a struggle, we're multifaceted human beings. And as little as I've tried, I've tried to not niche down and show that I'm complex, but at the end of the day, people still have an idea in their head of who I am and what my reality is. Yes. So it's hard.
Yeah. 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 And, I think that you want to say that my response wants to be, do what you want. And the people who stick around are your people, and the people who leave weren't meant to be there anyway. And it sounds great, but it's not that simple. And I know it's not. And so I appreciate you sharing the struggle behind that. And I'm a little nervous because I'm worried that maybe that you're talked out of it at this point, but I think I have to ask you about the mom talk. And I know that you posted about, that conflict and how it did result in people making a lot of judgments and assumptions about who you are. Can you share a little bit about kind of the roller coaster of emotions that was that situation?
Yeah. Can I say one more thing about the other topic?
Of course.
So in relation to the social media, in relation to feeling like I have to live up to a certain standard or people's perception of me, two things come to mind. I am so shame aware. I am so aware of the level of shame that mothers and people feel when they log on social media and they see what other people have or who other people have in their life or what other people are doing, that it hinders me from sharing the positive because I so very much do not want to be someone who induces shame for somebody else. And I don't want people to not feel welcome on my page because something I'm doing or something that I have is so unrelatable for them. So that definitely hinders me, is like my awareness of people's shame. So that is just like a really interesting one. Okay, so we're going to talk about copycat girl and the whole social media situation.
Yeah.
Restate the question really quickly. Sorry.
I just, from watching your posts about it, it seemed like a very short period of time, but like this very intense roller coaster of emotions, from what the heck to pissed off to whoa, who are all these people, to burnt out from it. Like it just seemed like within like a few days you were all over the map. And I don't mean that in a mean way. I can't relate, but I could see, just the up and down. And I want to use your words and have you share what that
Yes.
was
Yeah.
like.
No, it was a roller coaster. And having a platform does mean that every action and word that I use has implications. And I don't take that lightly.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, it was very much a fine balance of I've worked really hard to not be a people pleaser and to have boundaries and to have the confidence to value my work and my needs and myself. I've worked too hard to ignore an issue for fear of being called dramatic. And
Mm-hmm.
so it took a lot for me to post about it in the first place and to know that I don't have control over other people's reactions to what I say. And that people don't always have context as to who I am and what I'm doing and what my values are, that they're just going to disseminate a video however they want to anyway.
Mm-hmm.
I've dealt with a lot of people who copy me mostly by ignoring them,
Mm-hmm.
occasionally by blocking them, and rarely by messaging them personally. And so that's what I chose to do with this one because they were a creator and they do this for a job. If a mom who's at home is just trying to have fun and copies a video, just having a good time, I don't care. Go ahead. If you want to spread the message of like mom support, I'm here for it.
Mm-hmm.
But, it did upset me when this video of mine was copied because it came from a 4-year sociology degree, listening to moms for the last 2 years and what they're struggling with, like coming up with my own ideas and like original thoughts about this topic,
Right.
this,
This wasn't like a trend,
No, like the trend.
Yeah,
was
like
down, but coming up,
the
I remember
copy
the
was
moment where I
yours.
was like,
Yeah.
I remember the moment when I was like, oh, the motherhood contract, that is the perfect term for this. Because everyone says, well, you signed up for this. And my whole thought is like, I didn't sign up for anything. Nobody told me this was a part of it. And so when I came up with that motherhood contract, I was like, all proud of, like, this is genius. Like, this is a perfect way to encapsulate it. I could make a series on it. We could talk about all the things in the contract. I was so excited. And the video did well. It hit, nearly 1 million on TikTok and Instagram. So anyway, lots of people copied it. She copied it verbatim. Went 3 times as viral as I did. And I thought, I don't love that she copied it, but maybe, the message is getting out there. So I messaged her and said, hey, like, I noticed you copied, I'd prefer if you like maybe put your own spin on the motherhood contract or you did that. Like, I'd prefer if you didn't copy me. She asked if I wanted to take them down. I said, it's okay. Like, if the message gets out there, then it's worth it staying up. But please, I explicitly said, like, do not copy my videos again. Like, I put a lot of work into this and this is my job. Long story short, she copied me again. And then her name was The Honest Mom. I'm trying to remember. I think she changed it. Can I say for absolutely certain that she changed it? I don't know. But I just know that when I went on her TikTok and saw this skit that I like had written, like my own words, like I wrote a skit that she had copied and the name change. I was like, what is going on here? Like, what is happening? Like,
Twilight Zone.
Not to. It felt like such a violation that I explicitly asked.
Yeah.
So then I made that original call out video. And I did it in a way that I wasn't bashing her. I wasn't bullying her. I wasn't calling her names or destroying her character. I was saying it's not okay. It's an issue in our industry. Please stop doing it. And so I didn't expect it to go viral. Nobody ever knows when something's going to go viral, especially a 1-minute long video directed at another person. Like, usually, like, people don't care. Like, I didn't know that it was going to go viral.
Yeah.
And so, so then, her response that she deleted, and it was this whole thing. And so the emotional, it was emotional. Like, at first I was like, oh, people are being supportive. Like, I'm glad they're not picking me apart. I did do it in a particular way, so that I wasn't being catty. Like, that's not who I am. Like, oh, the support's nice. And then there got to a moment where I was like, this is too much attention, too much pressure. Now people want a response. Now people are calling it a mom feud, mom drama. And like that, I could do a whole podcast on that. Cause when we use language that is like TikTok drama, I'm like, no, it's an industry problem. And women are allowed to speak up on issues without being called dramatic or hormonal or whatever. Like, we're allowed. So it's a long answer. It was a very short high and a very big low of like, it's so much pressure. There's a lot of attention. People are making up their own assumptions. There's YouTube videos on it. There's Reddit threads on it. People are like disseminating it all as if we're just like these two random moms who are feuding. I've been creating content for 2.5 years.
Yeah.
This woman shows up a couple months ago and just starts copying everyone, and just like to be like put on this thing of like, well, she said this and she said this, and like I just wanted her to stop copying me.
Right.
And I wanted people to know generally that content creation is a real job, and what we do is work, and when it's copied, it really is not nice. Yeah. And so I made a video to say like my why as to why I make content to help moms and things like that, and that really resonated with people, and millions of people have seen it, and 300,000 people have followed me. And so the followers are nice, but people are still talking about it. Like I'm trying to make videos about other things, and people are like, oh, did you know her, this to her account? And I'm like, leave it, like leave her alone. People have said horrendous things to this woman.
I know. Yeah.
Horrendous things. And it's like, it's not okay. Yeah. And it still breaks my heart. Like I am sad for her.
Yeah.
Of course she's responsible for her own actions, but the gang mentality that people get and the horrendous things that they said to her are not appropriate. And I was hoping that my example of doing it with grace and kindness and strength at the same time would be reflected. Yeah. But people are who they are. And it makes me really sad how where some people went with it, to be honest with you. And so I can't just be like, I'm not like, I won 300,000 followers and she's gone. I'm like, that poor woman, I hope she's okay. Clearly the way she's acting is a response probably to her own trauma, and people need to be a little bit more nice.
No. And I appreciate you taking the time, and I know I'm poking the bear here with this. So I appreciate it. And I just think that I was so impressed by how you handled it. And I really thought, the video you did about why, like that could be like a Netflix documentary. It's so well done. And there's such a level of sophistication and poise that you did in all of your videos, all of your response videos about it. And I have to say, I agree with you. I think, I don't know. I'm getting the phrase that keeps coming to mind is, I feel like it's like a TikTok thing. People are like, we ride at dawn. It's like, this isn't a battle, like this is just two people who have a job, and there's some controversy. And I know from your videos that your intention was not to bring this woman down in any way. It just was like, listen, there's a code of conduct here that's not being followed. So anyway, I appreciate the time you took in your response as it was happening, and now again hashing it out with me. And I'm sorry.
Like, make it be over.
Yeah, I know. Like, I know, but
the last thing I want is to be known as like the TikTok mom drama person. I'm like, no, like,
but you're not, it'll pass. No. Like it, it'll pass. And so much of what you're doing outside of that, everything else that you're doing outside of that is why it's not like you had 100 people following you and now you have 800. It's 800,000. It's like there was a lot of people there before any of this. And yeah, I know. So one thing I want to ask you, just as like a person who has struggled with creating short form video, and just, for me, it's very compartmentalized. I'm either in a work mode and I'm in a let's make videos mode, or I'm not. And I've seen you traveling out and about doing things, and it feels, and I'm sure this is part of why you are so good at it and do this as a job, but it feels like it's a very fluid part of your life. Like I could never have been on a girls' trip and been like able to film TikToks. To me, they're just two separate things. How do you blend them for yourself? Or is there a blend, or do you have boundaries? Like, when are you creating content? When is your real life, and how are they overlapping? Do you get what I'm asking you?
Yeah, it's hard. I've had to work really hard to put up boundaries to not make videos in my regular life, because otherwise it just takes over. There was a time that it did take over. But I have this creative brain that's just always thinking of how something can be content, which is a blessing and a curse.
Yeah.
You know? It's a curse in that it stops me from being fully present in all my moments. And it's a blessing because I can take moments that many people relate to and make it into a video that people are like, oh my gosh, me too. Yeah. So it's, you know, it really is a blessing and a curse. And unfortunately, the more I try to compartmentalize it, the harder it is to come up with creative concepts.
Yeah.
Because if I say, oh, this is your block of time to make reels, I sit down and I scroll reels and I'm like, I don't really know what I want to make. I don't really know what this is about. Whereas like I can like deal with a really frustrating situation or like a very relatable situation. And all of a sudden, like I'm scrolling and the right sound will come up and I'll be like, yes, that is the sound for that situation. And so it means that it overflows into my life. But I put up boundaries and I will just say, I'm not doing it at this time. So, you know, when we were on, we went away to Montreal, I made one video in the car because I was bored. The rest of the time I put my phone away. And I had one afternoon where we were sat drinking wine in a lovely little Montreal cafe place. And I was zoning out of my phone. And I think I made 4 TikToks in half an hour. And the rest of the time I wasn't doing it.
Wow.
And I think I got a sound that I was like, oh, on the way to this restaurant, let's make this silly one. It was like me like walking like ridiculously in Montreal. But I have to really intentionally do that because I get joy from making short form content. And if it were up to me and it didn't negatively impact my family, I would make videos all day long because it's the funnest part of my job.
Yeah. And you know, I asked you from a, like, I was admiring it. I was like, whoa, she can do that. Okay. Like, you know what I mean? I wasn't asking you in a judgment at all. Like, it was like, oh, okay. Maybe because I sometimes feel like I'm just overthinking it, you know, where I'm like, oh, why don't I just whip out my phone right now? You know what I mean? Anyway.
Which you totally should. You totally should.
I know. Everybody keeps telling me that.
Both thing. It's one of those things where because it overflows, that's where some of my best content comes from. But because it overflows, that means I have to be very intentional about being present. So it's a both thing. That, you know, I think often sometimes if I ever sound defensive, it's because a lot of people admire what I do and how I can do it. And while it is a blessing and while I have achieved success from it and while it's something that other people might struggle to do, it also comes with this other side that isn't really talked about as much.
Yeah. All right. And the last question I want to ask you, because I'm at time with you now, but and I know you're Canadian and you're not necessarily feeling this as much as we are, but what do you have a boundary in place for yourself that you exist by, or how do you handle sort of what's happening culturally and societally and how you respond or not respond? Or talk to me a little bit about that, because I know a lot of the US influencers are feeling the pressure to respond to Roe v. Wade, and maybe even you are too at this point, honestly, but there is this like that. I don't know. What is your sort of philosophy on responding to societal things that are happening?
Well, there's multiple parts to that. The first part is that there is this social pressure to now have a stance on everything.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, businesses, influencers, companies everywhere have taken advantage and will now make a statement on everything, not even because they care that deeply about it, but because it ticks a box and they won't get canceled. You know, it just is like, okay, well, they discussed it when really the intention isn't there, the education isn't there, the work, the deep work isn't there. It's just a matter of making a statement and moving on. I will also say that I have to, when I look at something that's happening socially, and by the way, I am very much impacted. It's, you know, been destroying my heart, even just thinking about like,
I know. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to imply that.
No,
I'm sorry.
But like you know, 70% of my followers are American.
Yeah.
98% of my followers are women. As a woman, I am like deeply impacted and feel helpless in the situation, let's say with Roe v. Wade. as someone who has attended church for the last 10 years and who is currently wrestling with what do I believe and how do I discuss that publicly, and the nuance to the whole situation is so, like, it's so hard.
Yeah.
Like, I'm absolutely against Roe v. Wade being overturned. Like, women need to have access to abortions.
Absolutely.
There is so much context and nuance in that conversation that is so important to have one-on-one and with our families and with our workplaces and with the women in our lives. And it is a struggle to fit the full capacity of what I think and believe about a situation into one singular post that can be dissected. And so it is incredibly hard to then make a stance on it.
Yeah.
As someone who has, you know, women and mothers as my main followers, it feels like something that is very important that I should say something about. But at the same time, I also know that there is a lot of amazing resources out there. There's a lot of amazing posts that really explain things correctly. There's so much good stuff out there that I don't want to just add to the noise.
Yeah.
And I don't want to just add to the, like, oh, well, this is what I think too, and this is what I think too, especially because I don't fully understand the laws in the States. I don't fully understand how it all works. And so then I don't want to say something that's wrong. People listen to me. You know, I realize I do have influence and I do have impact. And the last thing I want is to say something that's untrue or to say something that could be taken the wrong way. And so it's so much pressure because as a human being and as someone whose work is in caring for and supporting women, I'm so passionate about it, but at the same time, it's so much pressure to know what to say, how to say it. You know, I could do a 3-hour live on it and still not cover all the topics that are nuanced.
Yeah.
So it's hard. And, you know, you can get canceled either way.
Yeah.
You know, the day after it happened, I opened up my inbox and I had people saying, oh, I'm so glad you haven't talked about it. Like, I need something lighthearted. And then the moment I posted about it, some people were like, thank you so much for using your platform. And other people were like, oh, well, that's not actually correct. Make sure you check your source. And I was like, oh my goodness. Like, I am a human being who creates video content. I am not the know-all of everything.
Right.
So it's hard. And so I try to look at a situation and say, what is my niche? My niche is supporting the emotional needs of women. And, you know, I try and then make content that is going to support them in that, not someone who's going to be where they come for education. But yeah, it's hard. It's really hard.
Yeah. I think, you know, the two things that came to mind as you were talking is, you know, just like, I don't know, I feel like the need to verbalize a stance on social media has become such that it almost feels impossible to have a stance and people believe that you have a stance if you don't share it. You know, like I agree with you. Absolutely believe that women need access to whatever we need. Just give us what we need, right? But I'm not prepared to talk about it yet because I'm still emotional about it, right? And I don't have a huge platform and following, but I was like, gosh, is my silence thus far going to be taken as not being, you know, passionate about this? It's like, no, I just, like you said, I'm human and I need to process. And at the end of the day, maybe I don't want to talk about it publicly, or I do, and it's just like, there's these, again, these like, either you're in the lane of talking about it or you're in the lane of not. And like, no matter what, there's going to be people that are pissed off at whatever you do. And the other thing that I was thinking about as you were talking is, as much of this influencer culture that we're in and these videos where people are educating us and helping us and that they are so helpful, I think it is worth reiterating your point of having an open mind. We have to trust. I would say to you, you have to trust, as someone who puts content out there, trust your audience to see it and go, what do I think about that? Right? Because you can't possibly I don't know. It seems, what am I trying to say? I'm trying to say that,
Yeah, I don't know if this is what you're trying to say, but it almost seems like you need to trust that people have a mind of their own and that they don't take everything you say and do at such face value that
yes,
it makes it so that the pressure is so heavy to get it right
yes,
because you're the only place they're going to for information about it.
yes,
I will
yes,
post that my son has apraxia of speech, and people will be like, tell us more about that. How do I know if my son has apraxia of speech? And
right,
inside, I'm going, I just told you that my son had it.
right.
Like,
I'm not
number
now a
one,
doctor, right?
yeah, like it's not my responsibility to educate
Exactly.
you about it.
Yes.
Number two, I don't have all the information. I don't want to be accountable for you knowing or not knowing a certain amount of information. I love that maybe I could expose you to this being a possibility, but there is this beautiful thing called the World Wide Web. Not to be sarcastic.
I know.
Like I feel like people have lost the ability, not everyone, obviously lots of us think for ourselves, and many people are researching things and doing the work, but it seems like there are instances where we've lost this ability to say, okay, you've opened my mind to this idea, I'm going to go learn more about that.
Yes. Yes.
But it's like I love you and I respect you as an influencer, so now I'm going to listen to what you say. That is an incredible amount of pressure.
Yeah.
To be the spokesperson for anything.
Yeah.
Like that's a lot of pressure.
Yeah. And I think that what you're saying is where you start to then hear creators, coaches of creators, therapists of creators start to say, this is where we have to stick true to ourselves and always come back to ourselves and why we're doing this and what we want to do in this world and the message that we want to share and send, because all the noise, like you said, gets really loud. And I don't know, at the end of the day, we're just a human being who want to help people and want to share something, and the pressure that comes along with that is immense.
A lot. Yeah. And just because someone puts you on a pedestal, it doesn't mean you have to stand on it.
Yeah. Even Elise Myers, she posted about like, I didn't ask for this. Like, and you had a video like that too, of like dreaming back to a time that this wasn't a job, where it was just total free thought. And, there wasn't all of these people now hanging on your every word in every video. And there's definitely a push and pull. And, I think that most people who don't have the experience of putting content out there just see the positives and just see like, oh, cool, you make money from making videos. And it's like, I know that your Netflix documentary level video that is 30 seconds long probably took 3 hours. So it's like, no one sees that part of it, right? And
I spent most of that day making it, and that event derailed my entire trip to Montreal. I couldn't focus on the things that my friends were saying to me because I was thinking about what everyone on the internet was saying about me. Like I couldn't focus on the show that was on the TV because I was too busy watching the YouTube video about me. People say, just don't read it. Don't listen to the noise. It's very hard.
It's hard. Yeah.
Very hard when people have a lot of things to say about you and you want to know how you're being perceived by the world. So it's definitely, it is a struggle. And I didn't know that was going to become viral. I didn't know that was going to become a thing. I would have liked to have just gone to Montreal and not thought about it.
I know. Oh, Libby. Well, thank you so much. I know that, I have a whole other page of notes that I think I didn't even get to, but I appreciate you and your time. And for what it's worth, given everything that we've just said, what you are putting out there is landing with the people like me who want it and need it and really value it. So thank you for your platform and your voice and what you're doing for all of us women out here.
Well, thank you so much. And thanks for having me on your podcast. This was a good conversation.
Thank you.
Therapeutic for me anyway.
Good. I'm so glad. Yep. I love her. Yep. Girl crush. Okay. And I know you do too. Libby is absolutely changing the game, not only in the content she creates and shares, the professionalism she brings to her industry, but also in allowing us a peek behind the curtain. If you're listening to this and you know what it's like to be part of social media as a creator, a consumer, or both, which, I mean, who doesn't in this day and age, I really hope you appreciated Libby's perspective as much as I did. I know I had a tendency to glamorize what it means to be an influencer, and I think there are a lot of people out there that think it's easy, but it's not. And beyond the ways that it's not based on the actual work, it can be very mentally and emotionally challenging. The individual person is the business. It's not a company, it's not a collective group of people, it's the individual. That individual is the face, is the brain, is the heart, is the soul, it's everything. And it's a lot of pressure. And so just, again, I appreciate Libby so much for sharing and giving us the real answers to those questions. And her honesty, as you know, did not end there. Libby does an incredible job of sharing her story and then using her story and her experience to help others. Her content is as relatable, engaging, genuine, and touching as she is. I took notes while we were talking, and I noticed that some of the key words I jotted down all relate to each other. They were shame sensitive, shame cycle, shame inducing, shame. The 3 pillars of Libby's content, motherhood, mental health, and cycle breaking, are topics that often involve shame and hopefully the dismantling of. And I don't know that I have much to say on it other than that the feeling that I get is that collectively and individually we are doing really great work. But we still have so much more to do. Libby is leading the charge, so please make sure you check her out on social media. Everything is linked in the show notes. Thank you so much, Libby, for all that you do for women and moms, and thank you for taking time to talk to me. Thank you for listening. But before we go our separate ways, I have to remind you of the amazingness that is Modern Mom Style Box. Tara Clark, who you all know and love from the super popular Instagram account Modern Mom Probs, and from episode 3 of this podcast, launched an amazing new clothing rental service. Modern Mom Style Box makes it easy to wear new clothes all month long without any stress or commitment. From seasonal staples to statement pieces, rent unlimited looks for just one flat fee of $60 a month. Take it from me, you're going to want this. The link and details are in the show notes. All right, bye! Thank you so much for tuning in today. Sass Says is a production of Luann Nigara, Inc. This podcast is meant to be educational and not meant to replace professional therapy or professional medical attention. To learn more about today's show and what's new in my world, head over to sasssays.com. Thanks so much. Talk later.